All right, the ACC is ruling. March on the hardwood. Is gridiron dominance possible in the fall? Who could be football's version of the orange? Plus, of course, plenty of spring updates, questions, and hopefully some answers. This is ACC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And this week on the panel, of course, our contributors are Brittnee Taylor Newman of football.com and Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC. So, hey, it's always a good time to talk football. And as Brittnee tweeted out just a few minutes ago, craving football. This is about where we start to get maybe a little bit restless, especially if your team or school got knocked out of the NCAA tournament early, or in my case, didn't make it at all. So ready for some football, and the boys are on the spring practice field right now. So Brittnee, let's talk about the big boys. Brittnee specializes in Florida State and Clemson. So the big news, the big teams, the big games, we go to Brittnee, we get the analysis, and for Clemson, a situation where they made it all the way to the national championship game last year, and there was a point in the season where we thought their number one receiver and missing him for the entirety of the campaign might really hurt this football team, but didn't necessarily turn out to be that way. That said, Dabo Swinney really wants Mike Williams in the lineup in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're right in the middle of spring practice. We're coming up on Clemson's spring game, which will be next Saturday. So I think fans and coaches alike have a couple of big questions. One of those, obviously, is Clemson's defense. They've lost 8 starters from last year's team. If you remember, though, they also lost 8 starters the year before, and then were still able to go 14-1. So it's kind of the same scenario. They're plugging in some guys. Dabo Swinney has been very optimistic about that. He has said that there is competitive depth to the guys that are in the lineup in the background that are kind of stepping up to the plate now. So we'll see, what happens there. Brent Venables has been very optimistic too. He said really, really good things about Christian Wilkins, who's a defensive lineman, sophomore this year. He's been a leader on and off the field, kind of showing up early, staying late, always keeping guys with him, putting in extra workouts. So they've got some guys that are trying to step in and fill those holes for sure. You've also got guys like Carlos Watkins, Austin Bryant. They're kind of expected to make up that solid front core right there on the line, which is obviously some of the leaders of that defensive attack. So we'll see what happens with Clemson's defense this year. If Dabo is not falsely optimistic there, then hopefully that will kind of buoy the offensive attack that we expect to see from Clemson. They're definitely hoping to make another run to the title. As far as the offense goes, obviously, as you just said, senior Mike Williams is coming back. You'll remember that last year in the first game of the season against Wofford, he was the player that was pushed into the goalpost by a corner and then ended up going to the hospital, had a fractured neck bone. So about 8 weeks after that happened, he was allowed to start working out again, lifting weights, things like that. So no playing. He still is actually in a green jersey. There's no contact allowed right now. But he has been working out and trying to get ready for this season. He's an absolutely fantastic player. 2 seasons ago, had 1,030 receiving yards and averaging about 18 yards per catch, which was 5 yards more than any other receiver on the team. So things looked really, really great for him 2 years ago. There were very high hopes for him last year. I was all over the place preseason talking about how fantastic I thought he would be. So now that it sounds like he's healed up just a little bit, I expect to see him back on the field, kind of buoying that offensive attack and kind of keeping Clemson in the national title conversation. But I think those are the 2 big questions that Clemson fans and coaches have right now. What they're looking to see as far as the answers on defense, and will Mike Williams live up to the hype on the field come spring game next weekend?
Yeah, and if you're a big-time program and you lose that kind of playmaker who was expected actually to have a big season and then move on to the NFL draft, was the original plan for Mike Williams, and it's been pushed back obviously by injury, is that if you're able to survive and in Clemson's case thrive without that guy, you sometimes discover that you've got other guys that have stepped up, and then the next year you're even better because you've got the superstar back, and then you've got other guys that were needed and stepped up, and I don't think anyone did that more so than Deion Kane, who averaged 17 yards per catch for Clemson last year. And you mentioned the contributions of Shaq Lawson and Kevin Dodd moving on to the NFL. Their numbers combined, unworldly 24 sacks, 48 tackles for loss. They were just a wrecking crew, but Dabo Swinney and company in recruiting doing an exceptional job, especially at that position, creating playmakers as edge rushers, outside linebackers, defensive ends that have just been off the charts in recent years, and really has marked the ascension of Clemson football, going from a 8 or 9 win program to the nation's elite in recent years. The defense being that much better. Mike, your thoughts about the Clemson Tigers?
Yeah, so Clemson's defense losing 8 starters, nothing new, like Brittnee just mentioned, having done and dealt with that last year, and then being one of the top defenses in the country yet again. I think when looking at Clemson, their defense, for as young as it's going to be, is going to be as talented as any defense in the country. And I think the one thing to watch for, however, is that Florida State, with their young defense, will be kind of the veteran squad of the 2 contenders in the Atlantic Division. A lot of freshmen started in that Florida State secondary, especially last year. And now with Clemson rebuilding on the defensive side of the football, again, it'll be interesting to watch which defense between Florida State and Clemson will emerge as the top defense in the conference, because let's face it, these 2 Atlantic Division foes are so much further ahead of the rest of the conference, especially on the defensive side of the football. So replacing some starters for both teams on that side of the ball, it'll be interesting to see who kind of emerges as the top defense in the conference yet again. I think, people like to talk about Boston College, and yes, their defense was very good, but the real athletes were on Florida State and Clemson's defense, and I think we saw that especially towards the latter part of the season last year. As far as Clemson's offense is concerned, obviously Mike Williams coming back, he's an All-American receiver. Having him thrown into that offense is really scary, especially considering what Deshaun Watson was able to do last year as a sophomore without Mike Williams for the entire season. It's very scary thinking about what Mike Williams will be able to do now, because Clemson is returning a lot of their starters on the offensive side of the football, and you just throw Mike Williams into the mix, and that's just another playmaker for Deshaun Watson to throw the ball to. So while the defenses between Florida State and Clemson could be more closely stacked together, I think Clemson far and away is the best offense in the conference and one of the best offenses in the country heading into next season.
So, Brittnee, if you noticed, Mike slipped in the backhanded compliment for Boston College's defense while Dan's not here this week.
I did catch that. Dan's going to be sorry he missed it.
So when we look at Florida State, of course, the storyline, Brittnee, is that for the first time in this little rivalry, burgeoning rivalry between these 2 schools, based on becoming separate from the rest of the conference, as Mike alluded to, that for the first time, Florida State's now chasing Clemson. Clemson chasing and finally catching Florida State, getting to the ACC Championship and beyond last season. Now Florida State may be a little hungrier this year, or maybe not.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely going to take a lot to catch up with Clemson, as Mike was just talking about, with that high-powered offense. You can only imagine what Deshaun Watson will be able to do this year. But if they're going to be able to catch them, the Seminoles are definitely going to need urgency. And I think that's one of the main questions that fans and coaches are going to have during their spring game next week, which I'll actually be at. It'll be here in Orlando, Florida, not in Tallahassee because their stadium is under construction, so I'll get to see it in person. But a couple of weeks ago, after spring practice started, Jimbo Fisher stopped by to talk to the media and dropped his phrase of the season, competitive dominance, and said that there was none, and said that the guys didn't even look like they wanted to be out there and that he'd never seen anything like that on a field in his life. It's nothing new for Jimbo Fisher to use the media to maybe get a message to his players, but usually we see that a little bit later on, not the very first practice of the spring season. So he said a few kind things since then, said that things have gotten better, but the message is still clear. His model is the 2013 team and the dominance that they were able to display when they needed to, in wins at least. So this team, the entire offense from last year is returning. I actually read earlier that they have more returning starters than all but 2 Power 5 teams in college football next year, which is really, really impressive. So there's high expectations for this. I think fans and coaches will be looking during the spring game to see if this current team, which is also comprised of 3 back-to-back top 3 recruiting classes, is finally going to start to show some of the dominance that the last couple of years, the last couple of teams have lacked. They're definitely going to need that if they're going to have a shot against Clemson, and unfortunately, the only way out of the division alive is through Clemson. So the second question I think that they'll be looking at, and this is the obvious one, is quarterback. Fifth-year senior Sean McGuire is out after ankle surgery. He'll be out until fall camp in the fall, which leaves things open for true freshman Malik Henry, redshirt freshman DeAndre Francois, and then third-year sophomore J.J. Constantino. You'll remember that J.J. took a few snaps in the game against Houston and really kind of looked unsure of himself there. It was thought, though, that because he does have a little bit more experience with Jimbo's offense, that he probably would be taking the majority of first snaps throughout spring practice. But it's actually really been DeAndre Francois who's emerged more and has been taking first snaps the last few days. There's some rumblings that maybe he'll be starting the spring game. We'll see. At the close of practice today, Jimbo Fisher was asked about the quarterback situation, and he said that they've all been good and they've all been bad. So typical Jimbo, not really giving anything away. We know that he will not declare a starter until August because that is just how he rolls. We won't have any answers till later, but fans are definitely going to be keeping a close eye because the job is very, very much open to anyone, and Sean won't even be able to compete for it until later in the summer. So it'll be interesting to see who emerges as the leader, who's going to be helping Dalvin Cook score for the Noles come fall.
Yeah, Mike. So with Florida State on defense, they were pretty much their dominant self through much of the season. Of course, the Houston showing against them in the Peach Bowl was rather shocking. Jalen Ramsey moves on to the NFL with a few others. Then on the offensive side of the ball, it was kind of difficult to watch Florida State try to, as Brittnee kind of finished her deal there, talking about Dalvin Cook shouldering everything seemingly most of the time and really bailing them out of some close games against some inferior competition. They want to get back to that Florida State passing game where they're really explosive and dynamic on the outside.
Yeah, they got plenty of playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. It's just a matter of getting the football to them, as Brittnee alluded to. And who's going to play quarterback? I mean, that's a big question we're all kind of looking to see. What's going to happen this fall. Sean McGuire not being able to compete until later in the summer because of that ankle injury. You know, I know it's in Jimbo's nature to wait a while before making a decision anyway, but all the more reason to wait even longer because Sean McGuire can't take snaps and can't prove himself. But I think Jimbo Fisher knows what he has in Sean McGuire. He's got a quarterback that has a command of the offense and has an ability to throw the football deep down the field. He's got a pretty strong arm. His decision-making, for the most part, has been pretty good. He struggled at times last year with the turnovers, especially in the bowl game. We saw all the issues he had against Houston. However, you know, with McGuire having the most experience, I think if he comes back, proves that he's healthy, I think he would be the guy to beat. But it really depends on how these summer workouts go. A lot of these young quarterbacks that Florida State has, especially Malik Henry, coming in as a freshman, he's a really impressive prospect. I'm really interested to see how he develops at Florida State because I think he has a chance to be something pretty special as well. But it might not be his year this year, especially with a fifth-year senior on the roster and Sean McGuire. Dalvin Cook, we know what he's going to give us. He's going to be a 12 or 1,300-yard rusher, score a ton of touchdowns, and be in the Heisman race. That's what's going to happen this year. He should have been in the Heisman race last year. Leonard Fournette got all the hype for a good portion of the season. And then, of course, Derrick Henry, because Alabama was just running all over everybody because Jake Coker couldn't throw the ball worth anything. I don't care what anybody says. Coker was just not a great quarterback. He was a decent game manager. Really was able to get the ball to some of his receivers out in space. They have a lot of talent at receiver at Alabama, but having Derrick Henry on the team obviously helps. But I think Dalvin Cook didn't get as much as he deserved, as much credit as he deserved last year running the football. So I think this is the year where he'll finally actually get the media hype that he deserves. As far as the defensive side of the ball, losing Jalen Ramsey is huge, but I think with Florida State's secondary with Derwin James and Trey Marshall, because Trey Marshall proved that he could be an elusive playmaker there in the nickel-type role, the star position that Florida State calls it, their secondary. He was very good last year at times when he was able to play, and then, of course, he got hurt, broke his arm, and missed really the back half of the season. So him coming back is just another playmaker in the Florida State secondary to make up for the loss of Jalen Ramsey.
Man, I think I could call in Brent Venables, defensive coordinator for Clemson, and he could join me side by side and maybe talk a little Jake Coker for you, Mike. I would defend the guy a little bit. More mobile than people give him credit for on the surface. 25 for 30 against Michigan State. Spartans defense for 286. And against Clemson, 335 through the air, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. I thought Jay Coker really turned it on late in the season. Yes, the running game set him up, great offensive line, and of course the defense shuts everybody down, aside from Deshaun Watson. And yeah, Jay Coker is not going to be an All-American this year. No, but definitely won't be because he's not even in school, but he wasn't last year. But pretty capable quarterback in my book. But so over the last couple of years, Mike, in particular, we've looked at top 5 positional players throughout the ACC. We've at times found it easy to forget about Wake Forest unless we're looking at punter or tight end. We've got some spring news with Cam Serenay, who's caught 100 balls over the last 2 years for 9 touchdowns for Wake Forest.
Yeah, punter extraordinaire Alex Canal is now finally graduated. The guy that was seemingly in college for like 30 years, he's finally graduated and moved on. He was really the only thing I looked forward to covering for Wake Forest, quite honestly, because the football team has just been such a struggle over the last couple of years. But offensively, they have Cam Serenay at tight end, who's caught over 100 passes in his first 2 seasons at Wake Forest. Really good playmaker for them. If you want to call a playmaker on that offense anything, I guess Cam Serenay would fit the bill. One of the few guys on the roster that can really make some plays and run after the catch. He was able to catch 46 balls last year for over 550 yards and also tallied 4 touchdowns, which is an accomplishment because Wake Forest didn't get in the end zone all that much. But he's going to miss the rest of spring. He has mono, which, of course, is pretty serious if left untreated, so hopefully he gets rest and relaxes, and hopefully his spleen doesn't swell up any more than it already does when you get mono. That's the one major problem with having mono when you play football. It's always the fear of the ruptured spleen, and of course, if you get hit in spring practice, that would not go well for somebody who has mono. So hopefully Cam Serenay is able to recover from that, and he'll be ready for the fall.
I was doing my best to scramble for Alex Cannell's statistics. I did find, and I thought I just wanted to verify that he did set the NCAA all-time record for a number of punts in a career. 323, set that against Notre Dame, and so I know Wake Forest had a few more games after that. So he's got a nice little cushion for the all-time punting record because, of course, Wake going 3 and out constantly, he gets to exercise the leg quite a bit. Good news for North Carolina coming off a big campaign in which they made it to the ACC championship game. And, of course, Larry Fedora with a nice showing with the high-powered offense last year. Elijah Hood with a big season, but he may have some help in the backfield very soon, Mike.
North Carolina is just so loaded in the last couple of seasons. They're one of those up-and-coming teams in the ACC as far as recruiting classes are concerned. When looking at 2017 class, they just signed 4-star running back Darius Lemons out of Clearwater, Florida, 6'1", 192-pound back, highly recruited by pretty much every school you could think of. A lot of SEC schools had interest, including LSU. He's a guy that's really going to be able to come in and make a difference, especially if Elijah Hood decides that it's time to head to the NFL. Darius Lemons is a guy that 2 seasons from now is going to be able to slide in and try to make his mark at the running back position. North Carolina has already signed 6 4-star recruits, according to Rivals, for the class of 2017, and we're only in late March of 2016. So that's really saying something about the ability of Larry Fedora to recruit. As the last couple of seasons, he's signed classes that are just continuing to get better and better, and the 2017 class shouldn't be any different.
All right, we alluded to March Madness off the top of the show, and the ACC faring extremely well with 4 entries into the... Was it 6 entries into the Sweet 16? 6 entries into the Sweet 16. Wow, that's crazy. And 2 make it to the Final Four. Who knows? They could have probably flooded the Final Four if they didn't have to play each other. But of course, North Carolina and Syracuse, not Virginia, blowing the big lead in the second half. So it's the Orange as a 10 seed getting to the Final Four. Jim Boeheim with another club at the Final Four. I think the last one was the 2003 team with Mello leading the national championship run. So, all right. So, segue basketball to football. Syracuse could do it as a 10 seed. Can anybody do it? Maybe, let's say the bar would be Final Four in basketball. The easy comparison there would be the college football playoff, winning the ACC, or maybe getting to an ACC championship game. and surprising all of us. Brittnee, any dark horses out there, early dark horses in the ACC?
Okay, so we're assuming something catastrophic has happened with Florida State and Clemson, and it's not going to be one of the two typical front runners. I think I'd be looking then at North Carolina. I know they've got another quarterback coming in. It's sophomore Mitch Trubisky. He has not seen a ton of action. I was just looking at his numbers earlier. He's only thrown for 555 yards, but he's completed 85% of the passes that he has thrown. And, of course, then you've got T.J. Logan and Elijah Hood coming back. The offensive line is looking to be really, really strong and shored up. So my dark horse would be North Carolina for a repeat run at the title.
Okay, Mike, any thoughts about the Syracuse of the football season?
Yeah, this is tough because the ACC is so top-heavy, and there are a lot of mediocre teams, and then there are a lot of real bottom feeders. Boston College, Wake Forest. We've already spoken about those two teams earlier in the show, but I think the one team you'd have to watch for is Miami, and the reason why is because obviously the Mark Richt effect, the fact that they've been able to recruit top 3 or 4 classes in the ACC over the last 5 or 6 seasons, and the talent just hasn't panned out. The talent is there on the team already for Mark Richt, and his team is going to be playing in the Coastal Division, which really is wide open. I think North Carolina is probably the favorite. However, they're replacing a quarterback, and Miami is not. They're bringing back one of the most solid quarterbacks in the ACC. Just ask Cam Underwood talking about how good Brad Kaya is time and time again. But we've all seen it with our own 2 eyes now, the last 2 seasons, and Brad Kaya is a guy that the offensive line is able to be shored up, and that's a huge question mark because of how poorly that offensive line's played over the last couple seasons. If Miami is able to establish a run game with Joe Yearby in the backfield, if the offensive line is able to hold their blocks for longer than a second and a half so Brad Kaya can at least look down the field, I think Miami definitely has an opportunity with the guys they have in place on the outside. They got a lot of young talent coming in at receiver, and their defense is extremely athletic, and I think that really makes a difference, especially in the Coastal Division where it's going to be wide open. So I guess if you're looking for a dark horse in the ACC, it would have to be Miami, but I really have a hard time seeing Clemson or Florida State not win the ACC this coming season.
Well, I don't think any of us see Clemson or Florida State getting knocked off, but again, it's just a fun question, and I'm thinking that neither one of you really delved as deep as you needed to, because I'm thinking North Carolina, Miami. 3 seeds, 4 seeds, something in that range. Syracuse at 10 seed, making the Final Four. So
let me try it again. Let me try it again. All right, Wake Forest. No, I'm kidding. Louisville. Okay, let's go with Louisville.
Oh, you stole mine. Go to it, Mike.
All right, Louisville has got a returning starter quarterback in Lamar Jackson. They have a guy coming in at Jawan Pass, a quarterback who was a highly touted recruit. They could potentially replace Lamar Jackson. Because look, Jackson really struggled throwing the football last year. He got a little bit better as the season went on, but he's a guy that's really athletic. And we saw that Louisville was happy to put Bonifant out on the outside when Jackson took the job from him at quarterback. Louisville's got a lot of playmakers on offense. Their defense is always solid. They're under Bobby Petrino. They consistently have a defense that competes with some of the best defenses in the ACC. They got a lot of playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, if you're going to dive really deep, I think Louisville's a dark horse. Problem with Louisville is that they play in the Atlantic Division. They're slotted behind Clemson and Florida State. Miami and North Carolina at least have a shot to get to the title game because they are playing in the Coastal. So I guess if you want to go a real deep sleeper, Louisville Cardinals, because they're in the Atlantic Division and they would have to get through somehow Clemson and Florida State.
Okay, so that was going to be my point as well, is that if you look to the Coastal, yeah, if you can win the Coastal, then you've got a one-game shot against Florida State or Clemson. If you're talking about Louisville or NC State breaking through against the two big boys, then they've got to beat them head-to-head. Or they can split and hope for chaos and that they win a tiebreaker or something like that. I looked at Louisville's schedule, got it pulled up right here, looking to see who they have to face in the other division. Pretty light touch in Duke and Virginia. And, of course, if you play in that division, while it's extremely top-heavy and you've got the two premier dates with Florida State and Clemson, you also have BC, Wake, and Syracuse to deal with, and for 3 gimme wins, while everything's every game's a pretty serious competition in the other division. You're going to get challenged top to bottom, even by Virginia on most Saturdays. So, yeah, interesting talk there. Lamar Jackson, if he improves as a passer, yeah, maybe they can surprise. So we'll see if that happens. Nobody's banking on that one. All right, good stuff from the ACC this week when we talk a little Florida State Clemson and we delve into spring news. And yes, we've got a pick of North Carolina and Louisville to possibly surprise this fall. All right, good stuff. Thanks again, obviously, for you guys jumping on here.
Absolutely.
It's good to see you. And so this is ACC Breakdown every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. And so for Brittnee Taylor Newman of football.com and also Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC, we will see you next week.